Have you ever felt completely invisible? Like you're a ghost in a room full of people? Your presence nothing more than a whisper of air. They walk right through. For Ella Vance, that feeling was a crushing reality. Standing in the middle of the most opulent charity gala of the year, surrounded by the titans of industry and the darlings of New York society, she had never felt more alone. Just 1 year ago, she was one of them. Tonight, she was a nobody, the discarded ex-wife. But in a single breathtaking moment, everything was about to change. One man, a man whose name was a legend, whispered in tones of awe and fear, was about to shatter her invisibility with 5 unbelievable words. This is the story of how a woman ignored by everyone was suddenly introduced to the world as a billionaire's fiancée. The chandeliers of the New York Public Library's Astor Hall dripped with a light so brilliant it seemed to mock the shadows where Ella Vance had taken refuge. Each crystal prism scattered the light into 1,000 tiny rainbows, none of which dared to touch her. She clutched a lukewarm glass of champagne, the bubbles long dead, a perfect metaphor for how she felt. Her dress, a simple but elegant navy blue silk sheath from a consignment shop on the Upper East Side, had felt like a small act of defiance when she'd put it on. It was classic, timeless. But here, amidst the custom-made Oscar de la Renta gowns and the glittering New Season Chanel, it was a quiet admission of defeat. It marked her as what she was, a relic from a past life. Just 18 months ago, she would have walked into this very room on the arm of Richard Sterling. Her name then, Ella Sterling, would have been on every guest list. People would have air-kissed her cheeks, complimented her, or rather Richard's choice of jewelry, and listened with feigned interest as she spoke about her work curating for the underfunded American Folk Art Museum. She hadn't been a person, she realized now. She had been an accessory. Richard's well-read, tastefully dressed art historian wife. Tonight she was just Ella Vance, and she was here on a professional Hail Mary. Her museum was on the brink of financial collapse, and the annual New York Philanthropic Legacy Gala was its last hope. She had spent weeks securing a single deeply discounted ticket, hoping to corner a potential donor to make a passionate plea for the preservation of art that told the story of America's unsung creators. But the room was a fortress of closed circles. Men in bespoke tuxedos laughed loudly, their Patek Philippe watches glinting as they gestured. Women with surgically perfected smiles and diamonds the size of robin's eggs clustered together, their conversation a low, venomous hum. Ella tried to approach a few people she recognized from her old life. An older woman, Mrs. Astor, whose family had once donated a small piece to the museum, looked straight through her, her gaze landing on a more prominent guest behind Ella's shoulder. A former friend, one of her bridesmaids, gave her a tight, pitying smile and a hurried, "So good to see you," before turning her back. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that started at her neck and crept up to her cheeks. She felt the familiar sting behind her eyes, the one she'd fought back for months after Richard had announced he was leaving her. "It's not you, Ella, it's me." He had said the classic coward's line. "I need something. More. Something with more energy. More synergy with my brand." His synergy had a name: Tiffany Vandersloot, a 24-year-old heiress to a chain of boutique hotels whose primary skill was documenting her lavish life for 3 million Instagram followers. Richard had traded Ella's quiet intelligence and shared history for a life that played better on social media. The divorce had been swift and brutal. His high-powered lawyers from Skadden Arps had painted her as an ungrateful spouse, and she'd walked away with little more than her dignity and a small settlement that was quickly dwindling. And then, as if the universe had a penchant for cruel irony, she saw them. Richard stood near the grand staircase, looking insufferably handsome in a Tom Ford tuxedo. On his arm was Tiffany, poured into a glittering, nearly transparent gold dress that left nothing to the imagination. Her laugh was high and sharp, grating on Ella's nerves, even from across the hall. They were the center of a magnetic circle of admirers. Ella's instinct was to flee, to slip out the side door and disappear into the anonymity of the New York night. But something held her rooted to the spot. It was a flicker of her old self, the woman who wouldn't be chased out of her own life. She had as much right to be here as they did. Straightening her shoulders, she took a deliberate sip of her flat champagne and turned her attention to a nearby painting, pretending to be absorbed in its brushstrokes. It was a futile effort. She felt their approach before she saw them, a shift in the energy of the room as people parted for them. "Well, well, look what the cat dragged in." Richard's voice was smooth-laced with a familiar condescending amusement. Ella turned slowly, schooling her features into a mask of polite indifference. "Richard, Tiffany, you're looking well." Tiffany's eyes, framed by impossibly long lashes, raked over Ella's simple dress. A small, cruel smirk played on her perfectly glossed lips. "Ella, I almost didn't recognize you without the Sterling name attached. It's amazing how some people can just fade into the background, isn't it?" The insult landed like a physical blow. Richard, to his credit, looked momentarily uncomfortable. "Tiffany, be nice." "What I am being nice," she chirped, snuggling closer to his arm. "I just think it's so brave of you to come here, all by yourself, trying to raise money for that little museum of yours. It's for like old quilts and stuff, right? So quaint." Every word was designed to diminish her, to remind her of her fall from grace. Ella's hands clenched at her sides. She wanted to say something cutting, to mention that Tiffany's grandfather had probably slept on one of those quaint quilts before he made his fortune, but the words wouldn't come. She was paralyzed by the sheer, unadulterated malice. "We were just talking to Harrison Blackwood about the new pediatric wing he's funding at Mount Sinai." Richard continued, his tone dripping with self-importance. "He's pledging 8 figures. That's the kind of philanthropy that really matters, you know, big picture stuff." The implication was clear. Her little museum was insignificant. Her life's work was a joke. Ella felt the room begin to close in. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the scent of expensive perfume. It was all suffocating her. She was invisible, and now she was being mocked for it. The walls of her composure were about to crumble. "If you'll excuse me," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. She turned to leave, her vision blurring, her only goal to reach the exit before the tears fell. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She took 2 steps before a voice, calm and low, with an unmistakable current of authority, cut through the noise. It wasn't loud, but it silenced the entire area around them. "I don't believe we've been introduced." Ella stopped. The voice was coming from just behind her. She turned, and her breath caught in her throat. Standing there was Julian Croft. Not just any billionaire, the billionaire. A man so wealthy and reclusive he was practically a myth. Croft was a legend in the world of finance and tech, a ruthless visionary who had built an empire from nothing. He never gave interviews. He was rarely photographed. His presence at a public event like this was unheard of. Yet here he was, his piercing gray eyes fixed not on Richard or Tiffany, but on her. He was impossibly tall, with dark hair lightly silvered at the temples and a face that looked like it was carved from granite. He wore a simple, perfectly tailored black suit with no tie, an act of defiance that screamed more power than any diamond-studded watch ever could. Richard Sterling, a man who prided himself on his unflappability, was visibly flustered. "Mr. Croft, I'm Richard Sterling Capital. It's an honor." He extended a hand, which Julian Croft completely ignored. His gaze remained locked on Ella. "You were leaving?" he asked, his voice a quiet rumble that sent a strange shiver down her spine. Before she could answer, Tiffany, never one to be out of the spotlight, pushed forward. "She was just going. We were just catching up. I'm Tiffany Vandersloot, by the way. It is like a total dream to meet you." Julian Croft's eyes flickered to Tiffany for a fraction of a second, his expression one of utter disinterest. Then they returned to Ella, a curious, unreadable light in their depths. "I'm sorry, I don't think she was going anywhere," he said, his voice dropping another degree. He took a step forward, closing the small distance between them, and gently took Ella's hand. His touch was warm and firm, a startling anchor in her sea of humiliation. The entire group fell silent, watching, waiting. Julian Croft looked from Ella to a stunned Richard, and a slack-jawed Tiffany. A ghost of a smile touched his lips as he lifted her hand, his thumb stroking softly over her knuckles. Then, in that voice that could move markets and topple corporations, he shattered the world as they knew it. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, his eyes never leaving Ella's. "Richard, Tiffany, I'd like you all to meet my fiancée, Ella Vance." The silence that followed Julian Croft's announcement was a living entity. It was absolute, profound, sucking the air out of the grand hall. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the frantic hammering beat of Ella's own heart. Fiancée. The word echoed in the cavern of her skull, nonsensical and terrifyingly real. Richard's face, normally a carefully composed mask of smug superiority, had crumpled into a canvas of disbelief. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. Tiffany's professionally plumped lips were parted in a silent O of shock, her perfectly curated expression of disdain wiped clean. The fawning sycophants who had surrounded them just moments before were now staring, their eyes wide, darting between the reclusive billionaire and the woman they had all dismissed as a piece of irrelevant social debris. Ella felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. This had to be a mistake. A cruel, elaborate joke. She looked at Julian Croft, searching his granite-carved features for an explanation. His gray eyes held hers, and in their depths she saw not a hint of jest, but a calm, unwavering intensity. He gave her hand a barely perceptible squeeze, a silent command, "Play along." And somehow she did. Her years of training as a curator of maintaining a poised facade in front of wealthy, often difficult patrons took over. She drew a breath, lifted her chin, and offered the stunned audience a small, shy smile, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. The spell broke. The silence shattered into a cacophony of whispers. Julian Croft engaged. To her, Richard Sterling's ex-wife. "Did you see the look on Richard's face? I'd pay to have a photograph of that." Richard finally found his voice. "Fiancée." He stammered the word, sounding foreign and absurd on his tongue. That's not possible. Ella, what is this?" Before Ella could even think of a response, Julian stepped in, his body slightly shielding hers in a protective gesture. "It's quite possible, Sterling," he said, his voice cold and sharp as breaking ice. "Unless you're suggesting my fiancée doesn't know her own mind." The threat was veiled but unmistakable. To question Julian Croft was to invite ruin. Richard paled, visibly shrinking under the billionaire's glacial stare. "No, of course not. I was surprised, that's all." "Congratulations," he managed to choke out. He grabbed Tiffany's arm, who was still staring at Ella with a mixture of raw hatred and disbelief. "We shoulda go get a drink." He practically dragged his new wife away, her gold dress shimmering as she was pulled into the crowd. The moment they were gone, the dynamic shifted. The very people who had looked through Ella minutes ago were now descending upon her like moths to a flame. "Ella, darling, you look radiant," Mrs. Astor exclaimed, her hand clutching Ella's arm. "You must tell me everything." "A Croft, my dear, you've landed the biggest fish in the ocean," another voice trilled. "Is that a Cartier ring? We're all dying to see it." Ella stared down at her left hand, still held in Julian's. It was bare. Panic seized her, but Julian was preternaturally calm. "We're keeping things private for now," he stated smoothly, his voice carrying an air of finality that brooked no argument. He then turned to Ella. "Darling, you look like you could use some fresh air. Shall we—" It wasn't a question. He didn't wait for an answer, simply guided her through the throng of gawkers, his hand now firmly on the small of her back. They moved with an unnerving purpose, the crowd parting before them as if by magic. He led her not to the main entrance, but through a side door she hadn't noticed into a service corridor, and then up a flight of stairs to a small private balcony overlooking Fifth Avenue. The cool night air was a welcome shock to her system. The distant sounds of traffic were a soothing hum compared to the buzz of gossip inside. Ella leaned against the balustrade, her legs feeling weak. She finally turned to face him. "What was that?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a cocktail of confusion, anger, and a bizarre, exhilarating rush of adrenaline. "Fiancée, are you insane?" Julian Croft was unperturbed. He leaned against the opposite railing, the city lights painting stark shadows across his face. "It seemed like a viable solution to your immediate problem." My immediate problem was a few catty remarks. "Your solution was to publicly announce a fake engagement to a man I've never met." "People have phones, Mr. Croft. That announcement will be on page 6 of the New York Post by morning." "I'm aware," he said calmly. "And please call me Julian." Ella stared at him dumbfounded. Why would you do that?" He was silent for a moment, studying her with that same unnerving intensity. "Let's just say," he began, his voice low, "that I am not an admirer of Richard Sterling, and I have an aversion to seeing people of substance being treated as if they have none." The unexpected compliment disarmed her for a second. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about my substance. I know you're the curator for the American Folk Art Museum. I know you've tripled their attendance in 2 years on a shoestring budget. I know you wrote your dissertation on the socio-economic implications of post-war Appalachian quilting, a piece of academic work that was both brilliant and criminally overlooked. And I know you're here tonight looking terrified but determined to try and save the one thing you care about. I know enough." Ella was stunned into silence. He knew about her dissertation. No one had ever read that besides her thesis committee and her parents. How could he possibly know these things? "How?" she started. "I do my research," he said, simply cutting her off. He pushed himself off the railing and took a step closer. "Which brings us to the real reason we're out here. I didn't do that simply for the theater, Ms. Vance. I did it because I have a proposition for you." Ella felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "A proposition?" "Yes. What you saw in there was a preview, a demonstration of what my name, my association can do for you. The people who ignored you will now court you. The donors who wouldn't return your calls will be lining up to speak with you. Your little museum will suddenly become the most fashionable philanthropic cause in New York." He was right. She knew with a sickening certainty that he was absolutely right. The power he wielded was terrifying. "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" she asked, her voice cautious. This was the part where he named his price. She steeled herself for something sordid, something demeaning. "I also have a problem, Ms. Vance," he said, his expression turning serious. "A business problem. I am in the final stages of acquiring a very old, very conservative family-owned company in Switzerland. The patriarch, a man named Jean-Pierre Duval, is 80 years old and believes a man's character can be judged by the stability of his personal life. He sees me as a ruthless, solitary predator. A wolf, as he puts it. He is hesitant to sign over his family's legacy to such a man." He paused, his gray eyes locking onto hers. He needs to see that the wolf can be tamed. He needs to see me as a stable, settled man. A man who is about to be married. A man with a fiancée who is intelligent, respectable, and completely unimpeachable. Someone like you. The audacity of it was breathtaking. He wasn't offering help, he was offering a transaction. A cold, calculated business deal. "You want to hire me," she said flatly, "to be your fiancée." "I prefer the term mutually beneficial partnership," he corrected her. "You need your museum saved. I need my deal to go through. I propose a 6-month engagement. We attend a handful of key events together. You accompany me on one trip to Geneva to meet Mr. Duval, and we allow the press to take a few tastefully curated photographs. In return, I will make an anonymous donation to your museum that will not only erase its debt, but will also fund its operations and acquisitions for the next 50 years. I will also provide you with a generous personal stipend for your time and discretion. After 6 months, we announce an amicable parting of ways. No one gets hurt, and we both get what we want." He laid it all out with the dispassionate clarity of a CEO outlining a quarterly report. It was insane. It was immoral. It was everything she should have run screaming from. But then she thought of her museum, of the beautiful, fragile works of art entrusted to her care. She thought of her dedicated staff who were all facing layoffs. And she thought of Richard and Tiffany's smug, triumphant faces and the soul-crushing humiliation of being treated like nothing. Julian Croft wasn't offering her a fairy tale. He was offering her a weapon, a chance to not only save her life's work, but to reclaim her own narrative. There would be rules, she said, her mind already working, the shock giving way to a strange, steely resolve. A contract. A genuine, startlingly attractive smile finally broke through his stoic facade. I would expect nothing less. My lawyers can have a non-disclosure agreement and a contract drawn up by morning. He extended his hand. Do we have a deal, Ms. Vance? Ella looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his face. This was a deal with the devil, perhaps, but a devil who knew the intimate details of her academic work and despised her ex-husband. She thought of the future she was facing, a slow, painful decline into obscurity and failure. Then she thought of the future he was offering, a future where her museum was safe and she was no longer a ghost. She took his hand. His grip was as firm and resolute as his voice. We have a deal, Julian. As they stood there on the balcony high above the glittering city, a silent pact was sealed. It wasn't a promise of love or a whisper of romance. It was a contract signed in the cool night air, a strategic alliance born of desperation and opportunity. And as Julian led her back towards the Gala, back to the world that had cast her out, Ella knew one thing for certain: she was invisible no more. Returning to the Astor Hall on Julian Croft's arm was like walking into a different dimension. The very air seemed to crackle around them. If their exit had been a quiet ripple, their re-entrance was a tidal wave. The hushed whispers erupted into a low, excited roar. Every eye in the room was on them, on her. Ella felt a blush creep up her neck, but this time it wasn't from humiliation. It was a strange, heady mix of terror and power. Julian's hand rested confidently on the small of her back, a silent, steadying presence. He navigated the room with the ease of a shark parting a school of fish, heading straight for the Gala's host, Harrison Blackwood, the very man Richard had been bragging about earlier. Blackwood, a formidable man in his late 60s with a mane of white hair and a reputation for being gruffly dismissive, broke off his conversation mid-sentence as they approached. His eyes widened slightly. "Croft," he said, his voice laced with surprise. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Harrison." Julian nodded, his tone easy but respectful. "Good to see you. I wanted to properly introduce you to my fiancée, Ella Vance." Harrison Blackwood's gaze shifted to Ella. His eyes, which had held a polite but distant look for most of the evening, were now sharp with genuine interest. "Ms. Vance," he said, taking her hand and giving it a surprisingly gentle shake. "The pleasure is all mine. Any friend of Julian's is a friend of mine. But fiancé, you've managed to do what the entire financial world thought was impossible." "Ella is full of surprises," Julian said smoothly, his eyes crinkling at the corners in a way that almost looked like a genuine smile. "I've been hearing about the wonderful work you're doing over at the Folk Art Museum." Blackwood continued, his attention fully on Ella. "My wife Eleanor is a great admirer of outsider art. We should arrange a private tour, and we must discuss your funding initiative. Perhaps my foundation can be of some assistance." Ella's mind reeled. Just an hour ago she would have considered getting 5 minutes of Harrison Blackwood's time a monumental victory. Now he was offering a private tour and a discussion about funding, all because of the man standing next to her. "I would be delighted, Mr. Blackwood," she managed to say, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "Thank you." The rest of the evening passed in a surreal blur. One by one, the titans of New York society, the very people who had snubbed her, came to pay their respects. They complimented her dress, her intelligence, her understated elegance. They spoke to her not as an appendage, but as a person of interest. They wanted to know her story, her opinions on art, her plans for the museum. She saw Richard and Tiffany across the room, watching her. They were standing alone, their former circle of admirers having migrated to orbit the Gala's new center of gravity, Ella and Julian. Tiffany's face was a thunderous mask of jealousy, while Richard's expression was a complex, unreadable mixture of fury and, was that regret? The sight gave Ella a grim, satisfying sense of victory. Julian played his part to perfection. He kept her close, his hand always touching her, her back, her arm, her hand. He would lean in to whisper something in her ear, his expression one of intimate amusement, though the words were usually something mundane like, "The man you're talking to launders money through his art purchases," or "Try the miniature lobster rolls, they're the only decent thing here." To the outside world they looked like a couple deeply in love, sharing private jokes. It was a masterful performance. By the time they left just after midnight, Ella was emotionally and mentally exhausted. Julian's driver, a silent man named Marcus, was waiting for them with a black Maybach so sleek it seemed to absorb the light around it. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the flashing cameras of the paparazzi who had mysteriously appeared, Ella finally let her facade drop. She leaned her head back against the ridiculously soft leather and closed her eyes. That was... She started, unable to find the right word. Effective, Julian finished for her. Tomorrow the real work begins. The car glided silently through the streets of Manhattan, eventually pulling up in front of a modern, impossibly tall skyscraper in Triangle below Canal Street that Ella hadn't even known was residential. The penthouse, of course. The apartment was a testament to minimalist wealth. It was a cavernous space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a 360-degree view of the city lights. The furniture was sparse but exquisite, a Le Corbusier sofa here and Eames chair there. The walls were adorned not with paintings but with what looked like ancient manuscripts and maps, each framed like a priceless work of art. "Drink?" Julian asked, gesturing towards a bar that looked like it was carved from a single block of obsidian. "Water would be fine," she said, still feeling overwhelmed. He returned with 2 glasses. "My lawyer sent over the preliminary contract," he said, his tone shifting back to the brisk all-business manner from the balcony. He handed her a tablet. "Read it. My personal attorney, Evelyn Reed, will be in touch with you tomorrow to recommend an independent counsel for you to retain. I will, of course, cover all your legal fees. It is imperative that you have your own representation and that you are completely comfortable with every clause." Ella scrolled through the document. It was dense with legal jargon, but the core points were clear. A 6-month term, a schedule of required public appearances, a strict non-disclosure clause with a penalty so high it made her stomach clench. And then the numbers. The donation to the museum was even more generous than she had imagined, a figure that would secure its legacy for a century. The personal stipend was equally staggering. It was more money than she had ever thought she would see in her lifetime. There was also a section titled Rules of Engagement. No romantic entanglements with third parties. A requirement to present a united front at all times. A clause about maintaining a plausible narrative of their courtship, the details of which were to be mutually agreed upon. It was the coldest, most romantic document she had ever read. "There's one more thing," Julian said. He walked over to a safe concealed behind a panel in the wall and retrieved a small, dark blue box. He walked back and placed it on the marble coffee table in front of her. It was from Cartier. "This can't be part of the charade if you don't have the primary prop," he said dryly. With trembling fingers, Ella opened the box. Nestled inside on a bed of black velvet was the most magnificent ring she had ever seen. It wasn't a gaudy Tiffany-style diamond. It was a vintage piece, a flawless, square-cut emerald of a deep forest green, flanked by 2 subtle baguette diamonds on a simple platinum band. It was elegant, unique, and breathtakingly beautiful. It looked like her. "How did you—" she whispered, staring at it. I told you. I do my research, he said. I know you did your master's thesis on the provenance of gemstones in Renaissance portraiture. You have a preference for colored stones over diamonds, and green is your favorite color. It was a logical deduction. This was more than research. This was an unnerving level of insight into her soul. Richard, her husband of 10 years, had once bought her a garish diamond necklace she'd hated on sight. This stranger, this man who was essentially hiring her, had chosen a ring that felt like it had been made just for her. "Put it on," he instructed. "You'll need to be wearing it from now on." She hesitated for a moment, then slipped the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. The cool weight of the platinum was a tangible reminder of the bizarre reality of her situation. She was wearing a multi-million-dollar ring sitting in a billionaire's penthouse pretending to be his fiancée. "Now for our story," he said, sitting on the sofa opposite her. "We need to construct a narrative. Where did we meet? How long have we been seeing each other? The press will dig, so it needs to be plausible." And so for the next hour, high above the sleeping city, they built their lie. They decided they had met 6 months ago, introduced by a mutual acquaintance at a private art auction at Sotheby's. He had been taken with her passion and knowledge. They had started dating secretly, wanting to keep their relationship out of the public eye. Tonight wasn't a sudden announcement, but the culmination of a whirlwind private romance. As Ella recited the fabricated details back to him, a strange thing happened. The story began to feel less like a lie and more like an alternate history, a life she could have lived. The thought was both intoxicating and dangerous. "You're a quick study," Julian noted, a hint of approval in his voice. "I've spent my life studying history and provenance," Ella replied, looking down at the emerald gleaming on her finger. "I suppose creating a fake one isn't that different." He nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Get some rest. Marcus will take you home. Tomorrow Evelyn will call at 9 a.m. sharp. And Ella." "Yes. Welcome to the firm," he said, and for the first time she wasn't sure if he was talking about their business arrangement or the rarefied, dangerous world she had just entered. The morning after the gala felt like waking up in someone else's life. Ella's phone, usually silent save for messages from her mother and the occasional museum alert, was a relentless hive of activity. There were dozens of missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize and hundreds of text messages. Friends she hadn't heard from in years were suddenly desperate to catch up. Distant relatives were sending gushing congratulations. Her email inbox was overflowing with messages from reporters, bloggers, and even television producers. The top story on every major news outlet's website featured the same grainy photo of her and Julian leaving the library. His hand on her back, the headline screaming variations of "Reclusive Billionaire Julian Croft Engaged," or "Mystery Woman Captures the World's Most Eligible Bachelor." They called her an art world intellectual, a stunning brunette, and in the more salacious tabloids, a vengeful ex, who had traded up in spectacular fashion. It was dizzying. At precisely 9:00 a.m., as promised, a woman named Evelyn Reed called. Her voice was exactly as Ella had pictured, crisp, no-nonsense, and terrifyingly intelligent. She provided the name of a top-tier matrimonial lawyer, a woman named Sharon Glass, at Paul Weiss, and informed Ella that a retainer had already been paid on her behalf. "Mr. Croft insists you take this process as seriously as you would any multi-billion-dollar merger, Ms. Vance," Evelyn had said. "Your interests must be unequivocally protected." The next few days were a whirlwind of legal meetings. Ella, guided by the formidable Sharon Glass, went over the contract line by line. Clauses were added to protect her reputation in the event of a breach by Julian. The terms of the museum's donation were ironed out to ensure it was truly anonymous and irrevocable. Her personal stipend was placed in a blind trust. It was a surreal experience negotiating the terms of a fake relationship with the same rigor as a corporate takeover. Once the contracts were signed and notarized, the performance began in earnest. Julian, it turned out, was a brilliant director. He knew that their story needed to be sold not through grand pronouncements, but through carefully curated glimpses of private moments. Their first public outing was a stroll through Central Park on a crisp autumn afternoon. Julian had sent a car for her with a bag from Bergdorf Goodman inside. It contained a simple, elegant camel hair coat, a cashmere sweater, and a pair of perfectly tailored trousers. There was a note. "Wear these. We need to look like we belong together. J." As they walked near the Bethesda fountain, a paparazzo conveniently appeared. Julian, feigning annoyance, pulled Ella closer, shielding her face with his body as he hurried her away. The resulting photos were splashed across the internet within an hour, Julian Croft, the cold-hearted tycoon, being fiercely protective of his new love. Their second outing was a dinner at a famously exclusive restaurant, Rouse, a place so difficult to get into that reservations were practically inherited. Julian didn't have a reservation. He was a friend of the owner. They were seated at a quiet corner table, and for 2 hours they talked. Not about the contract or the plan, but about themselves. Ella found herself telling him about her childhood, about her passion for forgotten artists, about the quiet satisfaction of restoring a piece of history. In return, Julian spoke about his own past, not the glossy version from business magazines, but the raw story of a boy who grew up with nothing, who taught himself to code in a public library, and who built an empire on logic, discipline, and a relentless refusal to fail. He was guarded, but she saw flashes of the man behind the myth, a man with a dry wit, a profound loneliness, and an intellect so sharp it was almost intimidating. "You realize," she said, swirling the wine in her glass, "that Richard would never have asked me any of this." Julian raised an eyebrow. "What did he ask you about?" "He asked me what I thought of his new watch, or whether the caterer for his firm's Christmas party was prestigious enough," she said with a small, bitter laugh. "Our entire marriage was about maintaining an image. It's ironic that what I'm doing with you feels more honest in a way." His expression was unreadable. "This is also about maintaining an image, Ella. Don't forget that." The warning hung in the air between them, a necessary reminder of the artifice that bound them together. But as the weeks went on, the lines began to blur. He started sending her books he thought she'd like, first editions of historical texts, obscure poetry collections. She in turn would email him articles on art history that she thought might interest him, connecting the patterns of ancient trade routes to modern-day supply chains. A strange, unspoken intellectual intimacy began to grow between them. The impact on her professional life was seismic. The American Folk Art Museum was suddenly the hottest ticket in town. A gala she had hastily organized, which she'd once prayed would raise $50,000, brought in over $3 million. Donors who had ignored her for years were now calling her, personally pledging huge sums. Vogue did a feature on her, The Curator's Eye, painting her as a brilliant, overlooked talent finally getting her due. But with the success came a new kind of prison. She was no longer invisible, but she was also no longer free. Her every move was scrutinized. An innocent coffee with a male colleague from another museum was twisted into a tabloid headline. Croft's fiancée in secret lunch with mystery man. Julian had been furious, not because he was jealous, but because it was sloppy. "You are no longer just Ella Vance," he'd told her, his voice cold over the phone. "You are an extension of my brand. Every action you take reflects on me and on our objective. You must be more careful." The rebuke stung, reminding her of her status as a hired asset. She was living in a gilded cage, a beautiful prison where the bars were made of public perception, and the warden was Julian Croft. The ultimate test was fast approaching: the trip to Geneva to meet Jean-Pierre Duval, the patriarch of the company Julian was trying to acquire. This was the entire purpose of their charade. "Duval is old school," Julian explained as they sat in his private jet, a marvel of technology and luxury that made first class look like a public bus. "He values tradition, family, and loyalty above all else. He'll be watching our every interaction, looking for cracks." "What am I supposed to do? What do I say?" Ella asked, her stomach churning with anxiety. "You say very little," Julian instructed. "You defer to me in matters of business, but you show your intelligence in matters of culture. He's an avid collector of antique clocks." I've had my team pull every piece of available research on his collection. You need to study it. Find a way to bring it up naturally. Show him you are not just a pretty face, but a woman of substance and intellect. My equal. The phrase hung in the air, my equal. Richard had never once considered her his equal. They spent the rest of the flight role-playing with Julian playing the part of the stern Swiss patriarch, peppering her with questions about art literature and her relationship with him. He was a demanding tutor, correcting her posture, her tone the way she met his gaze. By the time they landed in Switzerland, Ella felt like an actress on opening night, her nerves stretched taut. The Duval estate was a fairy tale castle on the shores of Lake Geneva. Jean-Pierre Duval himself was a small bird-like man with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through her. Dinner that night was an ordeal. Duval spoke in a mixture of French and English, his questions polite but probing. His wife, a silent, elegant woman, watched Ella with a look of intense scrutiny. Ella followed Julian's script perfectly. She listened more than she spoke. She praised the art in their home, and at the perfect moment she brought up her admiration for a specific 18th-century Breguet clock she knew was Duval's most prized possession. Duval's eyes lit up. For the first time he seemed to relax, launching into a passionate history of the timepiece. Ella engaged him, asking intelligent questions, her genuine passion for historical objects shining through. Later in the evening, as Julian and Duval were discussing business, Duval's wife, a woman named Colette, approached Ella. "My husband is very taken with you," Colette said, her English heavily accented. "But I see things he does not." Ella's heart froze. "I'm not sure what you mean." Colette looked at the magnificent emerald on Ella's finger. "A man like Julian Croft does not love easily. He acquires. He conquers. That ring is a statement of ownership, not of affection. Tell me, my dear," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "when he looks at you, does he see a woman he loves, or does he see the final perfect piece of his collection?" The question struck Ella with the force of a physical blow, because she didn't know the answer. She looked across the room at Julian, who was deep in conversation with her husband. He was powerful, brilliant, and in that moment completely unreadable. She thought of their conversations, the books, the flashes of wit and warmth. But she also remembered his cold fury, his constant reminders that this was a transaction. Colette Duval's words had planted a seed of doubt, a terrifying question that began to bloom in the dark corners of her mind. What if this gilded cage wasn't a temporary arrangement? What if she was just another one of Julian Croft's beautiful, priceless possessions? The trip to Geneva was a resounding success for the contract, but a personal failure for Ella. While the Swiss patriarch Jean-Pierre Duval was charmed, his wife Colette had planted a seed of doubt with a single piercing question. When he looks at you, does he see a woman he loves, or the final perfect piece of his collection? The words haunted Ella, echoing in the sterile perfection of Julian's world. Life in New York became a gilded cage. While her museum flourished under her newfound influence, her relationship with Julian grew colder, more transactional. He was a brilliant director, but she was starting to feel less like a partner and more like a high-class employee. The true crack in their facade arrived in a blood-red dress. Her name was Isabella Rossi, an Italian heiress and Julian's former flame. She appeared at a ballet gala, a beautiful panther marking her territory. She openly mocked Ella with condescending praise, regaling their table with intimate stories of a wild, passionate Julian that Ella had never known. Each story was a reminder of their shared history, positioning Ella as a temporary academic curiosity. Later that night in the penthouse, the pretense shattered. "You just let her humiliate me?" Ella accused, her voice trembling with a confusing mix of anger and jealousy. "This is a business transaction, Ella," Julian stated, his voice devoid of warmth. "Your feelings of humiliation are not part of our contract." The words struck her like a slap. He was right. Her feelings, her burgeoning affection for him, none of it was in the fine print. "Colette Duval was right about you. she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You don't connect with people, you acquire them." She walked out, leaving Julian alone in his silent penthouse and creating a chasm of cold silence between them. While they communicated only through clipped, formal texts, Richard Sterling was fanning the flames of his own wounded pride. Consumed by jealousy, he hired a private investigator to dig into their fairy tale romance. It didn't take long to find the weak link, a disgruntled former employee of Julian's. For the right price, the man provided calendar entries and internal memos that told a damning story not of love but of strategy sessions, appearance preps, and contract reviews. Richard now had his weapon. He chose his battlefield, the annual Art and Finance Symposium at the Met, where Julian was scheduled to give a rare keynote interview. Leaking anonymous rumors to gossip columnists, Richard primed the city for a scandal. The night of the symposium, the air was thick with tension. Ella and Julian had reached a fragile truce moments before, with Julian offering a rare, almost apology for his coldness. "I may have been mistaken," he'd said, "about emotions not having a place in this." But the moment was cut short by a security call about the escalating rumors, and they reverted to their roles, agreeing to present a flawless united front. On stage, Julian was captivating. When the journalist inevitably asked about Ella, his eyes found hers in the front row. "Ella has a way of seeing the world that is transformative," he said, his voice laced with what sounded like genuine awe. For a heartbeat, Ella let herself believe it was real. That's when Richard Sterling stood up. "A beautiful sentiment," he called out, his voice dripping with venom. "But I have to wonder, is that sentiment part of the contract?" A shocked gasp rippled through the audience. "I think everyone here would be interested to know that this profound engagement is a 6-month business deal," Richard shouted, his face red with triumph. "That this ring on her finger isn't a symbol of love, but a line item in a budget. She is a hired actress." The silence that followed was absolute. Ella felt hundreds of eyes on her, a crushing weight of pity and scorn. This was it, the ultimate humiliation. Her instinct was to flee. But as she looked at Richard's victorious sneer, a cold, hard anger displaced the fear. He would not define her again. Slowly, Ella stood up and turned to face him. "You're right, Richard," she said, her voice clear and steady. "It started with a contract." The confession hung in the air, electric. "It started as a transaction," she continued, her voice gaining power. "I needed to save my museum a place filled with art you'd call insignificant, and Mr. Croft needed to present a certain image. But a funny thing happened when I stopped being your wife, Richard. I started to find my own voice. Julian's name opened doors, but I was the one who walked through them. His name gave me a platform, but my passion is what built the foundation." She then turned her gaze to Julian, whose face was a storm of unreadable emotion. "And in between the strategy sessions we talked. He didn't ask about his brand, he asked about my work. He read my dissertation, he listened. He saw a part of me that I had forgotten existed." Tears streamed down her face, tears of fierce, hard-won clarity. "So yes, it started as a lie, a cold arrangement. But somewhere in the middle of all the performance, something real began to grow, something that wasn't in any of the clauses. You can't put kindness in a contract. You can't legislate respect. And you certainly can't fake the feeling of being truly seen." She turned her back on Richard, dismissing him entirely. "My name is Ella Vance," she declared, "and I have more honesty and integrity in my little finger than a man who would try to destroy a woman just to soothe his own ego." A single person began to clap, then another, and then the entire auditorium was on its feet, a wave of applause washing over her. Through the roar, she saw Julian walk to the edge of the stage, his eyes locked on hers with breathtaking admiration. He took the microphone. "She's right," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It was my cynical plan, but the contract had a fatal flaw. It didn't account for Ella. I set out to acquire a company, and I found something infinitely more valuable." He walked down the stage steps and directly to her. As cameras flashed around them, he dropped to one knee. A collective gasp swept the room. "The original contract has been terminated," Julian said, his voice for her alone yet heard by all. So I would like to offer a new proposal, one with only a single unwritten clause. Ella Vance, would you do me the honor of making our lie the absolute truth? Will you marry me? In front of the world that had once ignored her, then tried to shame her. Ella gave her answer, tears of joy now flowing freely. Yes, she whispered as the applause erupted around them. Yes, I will. In the end, Ella Vance's story wasn't about landing a billionaire. It was about a woman who, after being reduced to a footnote in her own life, found the courage to write an entirely new book. The journey started with a lie, a desperate act of self-preservation that unexpectedly blossomed into a testament to her own worth. She learned that true visibility doesn't come from the man whose arm you're on, but from the strength you find within yourself. Julian Croft may have opened the door, but it was Ella who had the courage to step through it and build a legacy of her own. Theirs became a story not of a transaction, but of a transformation, proof that sometimes the most unexpected arrangements can lead to the most authentic truths, and that the best love stories are the ones that begin long after the contract has been voided. Thank you for listening to this story. If you were moved by Ella's journey from invisibility to empowerment, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who might need to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories of incredible transformations. Don't forget to comment below what part of Ella's story resonated with you the most. We love hearing from you. Until next time. The sting of betrayal isn't a single event. It's a lingering poison. For Olivia Adler, that poison was administered in a ballroom filled with crystal chandeliers and 100 smiling assassins. Her ex-husband Preston, a man she'd sacrificed everything for, stood with his arm draped around his new fiancée, a woman whose success was built on the ashes of their marriage. He raised a glass, his voice echoing through the microphone, toasting a future she was never meant to have. In that moment, broken and invisible, Olivia had no idea that a forgotten past and an unimaginable fortune were about to collide, turning her world and theirs upside down forever. The annual Sterling Foundation Charity Gala was the glittering pinnacle of the city's social calendar, a place where fortunes were pledged and reputations were cemented. For Olivia Adler, it was the seventh circle of hell, and she was walking into the fire with her eyes wide open. Her boss at the small architectural firm, Mr. Henderson, had insisted the entire team attend. It's about networking, Olivia, he'd said, oblivious to the personal horror the event represented. 2 years ago, she had walked into this very ballroom on the arm of her then-husband, Preston Montgomery. He was a rising star in private equity, sharp-suited and sharper-witted with an ambition that burned like a furnace. Olivia, a talented but unassuming architectural drafter, had been his steadfast support system. She'd worked extra hours to help him through his MBA, proofread his proposals, until her eyes blurred and put her own career ambitions on the back burner, believing they were building a shared future. That future had shattered 6 months ago. The divorce was swift and brutal. The reason had a name: Brenda Finch. Brenda was a vice president at a rival firm, a woman who moved through the world with the predatory grace of a panther. Preston hadn't just left Olivia. He had upgraded, as he'd once drunkenly implied to a mutual friend. He had traded in a reliable sedan for a high-performance sports car, and tonight they were being celebrated. Preston's firm was a major sponsor of the gala, and he was slated to give a keynote address. Olivia clutched her small, worn handbag, feeling profoundly out of place in her simple, off-the-rack navy dress. All around her were women in designer gowns and jewelry that cost more than her annual salary. She tried to busy herself by the silent auction tables, pretending to study a signed piece of sports memorabilia, when a familiar, dreaded voice cut through the air. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." Olivia's spine stiffened. She turned to see Preston looking insufferably handsome in a custom tuxedo. Beside him, Brenda Finch was a vision in blood-red silk, a massive diamond engagement ring flashing on her finger like a weapon. Preston, Olivia said, her voice tight. "Brenda, I'm surprised to see you here, Olivia." Brenda said, her smile a perfect painted slash. I didn't think this was really your scene. The implication was clear. You don't belong. My firm has a table, Olivia replied, forcing a polite neutrality she didn't feel. Preston smirked that familiar condescending tilt of his lips that she now realized was not confidence but pure arrogance. That's nice. Good for Henderson's little operation. Still drafting blueprints for suburban kitchen remodels. The jab landed precisely where it was intended. Olivia's dream had always been to design sustainable, innovative public spaces, but her current job was creatively stifling a necessity to pay the bills for the cramped apartment she now lived in. It pays the rent, she said, her cheeks flushing. I'm sure it does, Preston said, then turned his full attention to Brenda, pulling her closer. Did you know darling Olivia was the one who encouraged me to get into leveraged buyouts? She used to stay up all night reading financial textbooks with me. A real cheerleader. He said the word cheerleader with a dismissive tone as if it were a quaint, pathetic hobby. Brenda laughed, a light tinkling sound that grated on Olivia's nerves. How sweet. It's a good thing you found a partner who can play on the field with you, not just watch from the sidelines. The cruelty was breathtaking. Every word was designed to remind Olivia of what she had contributed and what she had lost. She felt the eyes of people nearby turning towards them, sensing the drama. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of her own making. She had to get away. If you'll excuse me, she mumbled, turning to leave. But Preston wasn't finished. He held up a hand. Oh, stay for a moment. They're about to introduce me. You should hear the speech. I even give a little nod to the people who helped me get here. His eyes gleamed with malice. He was promising one final public humiliation. As if on cue, the master of ceremonies took the stage. Olivia was frozen, trapped in the orbit of their toxic success. A few minutes later, after a glowing introduction, Preston stood at the podium, bathed in a spotlight. He was charming, witty, and confident. He spoke of ambition and vision of seizing opportunities. And of course he said, his eyes scanning the crowd and deliberately landing on Olivia, for a fraction of a second I wouldn't be here without the support of people who believed in me even when my vision surpassed their own understanding. And most importantly, I stand here today because I found a true partner, a woman whose brilliance and drive match my own. To my fiancée, Brenda. The room erupted in applause. Brenda blew him a kiss. The spotlight found her and she basked in it. It was a perfectly crafted narrative positioning Olivia as the simple, small-minded first wife who couldn't keep up the necessary but ultimately disposable booster rocket for his ascent to the stars. Olivia felt a wave of nausea. She stumbled back away from the crowd, her vision blurring with unshed tears. She pushed through a set of double doors and found herself on a cold, deserted balcony overlooking the city. The glittering lights of the skyline mocked her. She had given that man the best years of her life, her energy, her dreams. In return, he had erased her from his story, recasting her as a footnote in his grand epic. Leaning against the cold stone balustrade with the sounds of his triumph echoing behind her, Olivia Adler felt a profound and terrifying emptiness. She wasn't just heartbroken, she was utterly and completely erased. The weeks following the gala bled into a monotonous gray. Olivia's life settled into a rhythm of quiet desperation. Wake up in the too-small apartment that smelled faintly of her predecessor's cat. Endure the long commute on a crowded train. Spend 8 hours drafting uninspired designs under the fluorescent hum of her office. Commute home. Eat a microwave dinner for one. Sleep. Repeat. The vibrant colors of her life with Preston had been replaced with a stark, unforgiving monochrome. She actively avoided any news of him and Brenda, unsubscribing from business journals and muting mutual acquaintances on social media. Yet their success seemed to seep through the cracks of her carefully constructed defenses, a headline on a newsstand, a snippet of conversation from the cubicle next to hers. Each mention was a fresh twist of the knife. Her only refuge was her weekly dinner with her best friend Jessica Chen, a sharp-witted journalist who had seen Olivia through the worst of the divorce. You need to get angry, Liv. Jessica said one evening, stabbing a piece of kung pao chicken with unnecessary force. Grief is a phase. Right now, you're just letting him live rent-free in your head while he's redecorating his penthouse with that she-devil. I'm not sad anymore, Olivia lied, pushing a stray noodle around her plate. I'm just tired. That's the same thing, just with better PR. Jessica shot back. You gave him everything. You deserve to be furious. But Olivia couldn't summon the energy for fury. All she felt was a hollow ache, a sense of worthlessness that Preston had so expertly instilled in her. It was on a particularly bleak Tuesday, with rain lashing against her apartment window, that it arrived. Tucked between a credit card offer and a utility bill was a thick cream-colored envelope. It felt heavy, important. The return address was not a name but a crest, an embossed emblem of a stylized bee intertwined with an oak tree. Beneath it were the words Davies and Associates Attorneys at Law, Beaumont Tower, Geneva, Switzerland. Olivia stared at it bewildered. She knew no one in Switzerland. She had no business with any high-powered law firm. Her first thought was that it was a mistake. Her second, more cynical thought was that it was some kind of elaborate scam. Perhaps Preston had sold her information to mailing lists, and this was the bizarre result. She almost threw it away, but something about the quality of the paper, the crispness of the type, made her hesitate. With a sense of weary curiosity, she sliced it open with a kitchen knife. The letter inside was printed on the same heavy stock. The language was formal, almost archaic. Dear Ms. Adler, this correspondence concerns a matter of the utmost urgency and confidentiality pertaining to the estate of our late client, Mr. Jonathan Beaumont. We have made numerous attempts to locate you and believe with a high degree of certainty that you are the sole surviving heir we have been searching for. It is imperative that you contact our senior partner, Mr. Alistair Davies, at your earliest possible convenience to arrange a meeting. We understand this news may be unexpected. Please be assured of the legitimacy of this communication. A prepaid first-class airline ticket for travel to Geneva has been arranged on your behalf, details of which can be accessed via the enclosed secure reference number. We await your prompt response. Sincerely, Alistair Davies, Senior Partner, Davies and Associates. Olivia read it once, then twice. Jonathan Beaumont. The name meant nothing to her. Sole surviving heir. It had to be a joke. Her family history was painfully simple. Her father, a kind but perpetually struggling artist, had died when she was a teenager. Her mother had passed away from an illness 5 years before that. Both were orphans with no known relatives. She was, as far as she knew, completely alone in the world. This letter felt like something out of a Victorian novel, not a Tuesday in her drab city life. A prepaid ticket to Geneva. The whole thing screamed scam. They'd probably ask for her bank details to process the inheritance, and then drain her meager savings account. She tossed the letter onto her small kitchen counter next to a stack of unpaid bills. For the rest of the evening she tried to ignore it, but it sat there, a creamy rectangle of impossibility, drawing her eye. Who was Jonathan Beaumont? Why would a Swiss law firm be searching for her? The next day she brought the letter to dinner with Jessica. Her friend, a natural skeptic thanks to her profession, read it with a focused intensity. Olivia expected her to laugh it off to confirm her suspicions of a scam. Instead, Jessica folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table. Liv, this is real. What? No, it's not. It's crazy, Olivia said. Look at the letterhead, Jessica said, pointing. The watermarked paper, the embossed seal. This is bespoke stationery that costs a fortune. Scammers use photocopies and fake email addresses. They don't use letterpress and couriers. But the name, Beaumont, it doesn't mean anything to me. Did your mother ever talk about her family? Jessica asked gently. Olivia shook her head. No, never. She always said she was alone, that her parents died when she was very young. It was a sensitive subject. I learned not to ask. Jessica's journalistic instincts were firing on all cylinders. Okay, Let's think about this. A reclusive, wealthy client. A search for a long-lost heir. A mother with a mysterious past. This isn't a scam, Liv. This is a story. She pulled out her phone. Davies and Associates, Geneva. A few seconds of furious typing and she turned the screen to Olivia. The law firm was not just real. It was one of the most prestigious and discreet private wealth management firms in the world. Their client list was rumored to include old European royalty and tech billionaires. Beaumont Tower was a real gleaming skyscraper on the shores of Lake Geneva. And look at this, Jessica said, her eyes wide as she scrolled through a series of older financial articles. Jonathan Beaumont. He was a legend. An industrialist and investor. Hugely powerful in the 70s and 80s. Became a complete recluse about 30 years ago. Nicknamed the Phantom of the Alps. He was notoriously private. No one has seen a photo of him in decades. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture so outlandish that Olivia could hardly comprehend it. A reclusive billionaire, a mother who never spoke of her past. A life of quiet struggle. Could they all be connected? What if... Olivia started, her voice barely a whisper. What if my mother ran away? What if she was disowned for marrying your father, a poor artist? Jessica finished, her voice full of awe. Liv, this is life-changing. You have to call them. You have to go to Geneva. The thought was terrifying. It meant stepping out of the gray, predictable world she knew into a complete unknown. It meant entertaining a hope so wild it felt dangerous. Hope was a commodity she couldn't afford right now. Failure to manage expectations was what had led her to Preston, and she wouldn't make that mistake again. But as she looked at the letter at the powerful, confident crest of the oak tree, a tiny, forgotten spark of defiance flickered within her. Preston and Brenda had tried to make her feel small, worthless, like a footnote in their story. What if she wasn't a footnote? What if she was the whole damn story? Taking a deep, shaky breath, Olivia Adler made a decision. She was going to Geneva. The flight to Geneva was a surreal experience. Olivia, who had only ever flown economy for a single vacation to Mexico, was now seated in a first-class cabin that was larger than her bedroom. She was served champagne she couldn't pronounce and food on actual porcelain. It felt like a dream. She was afraid to wake up from a fleeting taste of a life that couldn't possibly be hers. With every mile that passed, the absurdity of her situation grew. She was a drafter from a no-name firm flying to meet with legendary lawyers about a billionaire she'd never heard of. It was madness. Geneva was pristine, an oil painting of old-world elegance and modern precision. A silent driver holding a sign with her name met her at the airport and whisked her away in a sleek black sedan. They drove along the edge of the lake past luxury watch boutiques and private banks before pulling up to Beaumont Tower. It was a monument of steel and glass that pierced the clouds, a testament to immense power and wealth. Her heart pounded in her chest as she rode the silent, high-speed elevator to the penthouse floor, which housed the exclusive offices of Davies and Associates. The reception area was less of an office and more of a private museum, with hushed carpets, dark wood paneling, and original modern art on the walls. A severe-looking woman led her to a pair of enormous oak doors. "Mr. Davies will see you now." Alistair Davies was an older gentleman impeccably dressed in a tailored suit with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through her. He rose from behind a desk the size of a small car and extended a hand. His office had a panoramic view of the lake and the jet dough. "Ms. Adler, thank you for coming on such short notice. I am Alistair Davies. Please have a seat." His English was perfect, with a faint, unplaceable European accent. Olivia sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The simple navy blazer and slacks she'd thought were professional now felt hopelessly inadequate. "I assume you have many questions," Mr. Davies began, getting straight to the point. "You could say that," Olivia said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Your letter was a shock. I don't know anyone named Jonathan Beaumont." Mr. Davies slid a leather-bound folder across the polished desk. He opened it to the first page, which held a black-and-white photograph of a young smiling woman with familiar eyes. Olivia gasped. "That's my mother." Indeed. "That is Elizabeth Beaumont, taken shortly before she left her home at the age of 19, Davies confirmed. "Your mother, Ms. Adler." He then proceeded to lay out the story, his tone calm and factual, as if he were explaining a corporate merger and not rewriting the entire history of her life. Jonathan Beaumont was her maternal grandfather. He was a brilliant but fiercely controlling man who had built a global empire from nothing. His only child, Elizabeth, was the light of his life, but he had a specific path laid out for her. A marriage to the son of another industrial titan, a life cementing the Beaumont dynasty. But Elizabeth had fallen in love with a young, penniless American art student, Olivia's father. When she told her father she intended to marry him, he had forbidden it. An explosive argument had ensued. Jonathan had given her an ultimatum: the man she loved or her family and fortune. Elizabeth, young and defiant, chose love. She left in the middle of the night with nothing but a small suitcase, severing all ties. She changed her last name to her husband's, moved to America, and never looked back, so determined to protect her new life from her father's influence that she erased her past completely. Your grandfather, Davies, continued, his expression softening slightly, was a man of immense pride. But his anger eventually faded, replaced by a profound regret. He began searching for your mother about 15 years ago. By the time our investigators found a trace of her, we learned that both she and your father had already passed away. The trail then led us to you. It has been a long and difficult search, Ms. Adler." Olivia felt a wave of dizziness. Her mother, who had clipped coupons and worked 2 jobs, was the heiress to a fortune? The narrative of her life, a simple story of love and loss, was a lie, or at least a heavily edited version. "My grandfather—" "Your letter said he was your late client." Olivia said, the word catching in her throat. "Yes. Mr. Beaumont passed away peacefully 2 months ago at the age of 94, Davies said. He spent his final years consumed with the need to right his past wrongs. He amended his will accordingly. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. Ms. Adler. Olivia. Jonathan Beaumont left his entire estate to you. Olivia stared at him blankly. His entire estate. That is correct. Beaumont Enterprises. His global portfolio of real estate, his art collection, his liquid assets. You are his sole heir. I don't understand. How much are we talking about? She asked the question, feeling foolish and small in the face of such a revelation. Mr. Davies didn't flinch. He slid another document towards her. It was a summary of assets. The numbers were so long they looked like telephone numbers. She saw the word billion repeated several times. Her eyes scanned the page, but her brain refused to process the figures. It was an astronomical sum, a fortune that could alter nations, let alone the life of a single heartbroken woman. She felt the room tilt. She wasn't just wealthy. She was one of the wealthiest women in the world. However, Mr. Davies said, his voice pulling her back from the brink of fainting, there is a condition. A rather significant one. Of course there was. It couldn't be that simple. Your grandfather, while determined to make you his heir, was also a pragmatist. He did not know you. He could not simply hand over control of a global corporation to a complete stranger, even if she was his blood. His will stipulates a probationary period. Probationary. For 1 year, you will assume a position on the board of Beaumont Enterprises. The company is currently managed by a very capable CEO and a board of directors, some of whom are other family members. Other family members, I thought I was the sole heir. Distant cousins, Davies clarified. Your grandfather's nephew and niece, Jeffrey and Camilla Beaumont. They have managed a subsidiary of the company for years and have long expected to inherit the bulk of the estate. They are displeased by this development. They will be watching you very closely. The trap was set. What do I have to do? Olivia asked. You have to learn, Davies said simply. You have to understand the business, prove your competence, and earn the respect of the board. At the end of the year, the board, including Jeffrey and Camilla, will vote on whether to ratify your position as the new chairwoman and grant you full, unequivocal control of the Beaumont Trust. If you fail to secure their confidence, what happens if I fail? Then the estate's assets will be liquidated and donated to a list of international charities selected by your grandfather. You would be left with a generous but comparatively small trust fund, enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life, but you would have no control over the Beaumont legacy. Olivia's mind was reeling. A year. She had 1 year to go from an architectural drafter to a corporate titan, all while being scrutinized by resentful relatives ready to see her fail. It was an impossible task. The old Olivia, the one who had walked into that gala 2 months ago, would have run screaming from the room. She would have taken the small trust fund and disappeared. But something had changed in her. The humiliation she had suffered at Preston's hands had burned away her naivete. It had left behind a core of hardened steel she didn't know she possessed. Preston had told her she was a cheerleader on the sidelines. Her grandfather, a man she'd never met, was giving her a chance to own the entire stadium. She looked out the window at the city below, at a world of power and influence she never dreamed she could be a part of. This wasn't just about money. It was about legacy. It was about proving to herself and to the ghosts of her past that she was more than what Preston had made her feel. She turned back to Mr. Davies, her expression no longer one of shock, but of quiet, unshakable resolve. When do I start? The transition from Olivia Adler, architectural drafter, to Olivia Adler, probationary board member of a multi-billion-dollar empire, was less of a gentle slope and more of a vertical cliff face. Mr. Davies became her Virgil, guiding her through the inferno of high finance. She moved out of her cramped apartment and into a sleek, minimalist penthouse suite at the top of a Beaumont-owned hotel, a temporary residence that came with a staff and a view that made the entire city look like a toy set. Her first few weeks were a relentless boot camp. Her days were filled with tutors. A retired economics professor from Cambridge taught her macroeconomics. A sharp, fast-talking Wall Street veteran taught her portfolio management and market analysis. A prim and proper etiquette coach taught her how to navigate the complex social codes of the ultra-wealthy. Her nights were spent poring over financial reports, corporate histories, and shareholder briefings until the words swam before her eyes. The sheer scale of Beaumont Enterprises was staggering. It wasn't one company. It was a hydra-headed conglomerate with interests in sustainable technology, pharmaceuticals, luxury real estate, and private equity. It was a global force, and she was expected to understand its every moving part. Her first board meeting was a trial by fire. She walked into the cavernous boardroom in Geneva, a room dominated by a table of polished obsidian, feeling like an imposter in her new custom-tailored business suit. The CEO, a capable and unflappable man named Robert Chen, greeted her with professional courtesy. The other board members, seasoned executives from around the world, watched her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. And then there were Jeffrey and Camilla Beaumont. Jeffrey was a portly man in his late 50s with a florid face and an air of perpetual entitlement. Camilla, his sister, was thin and severe, with eyes that missed nothing and a smile that never reached them. They represented the old guard, the family members who had been waiting in the wings for decades. The arrival of an unknown granddaughter from America was not just a surprise, it was an insult. Ms. Adler Jeffrey began, his voice oozing false cordiality as the meeting started. "A pleasure to finally meet you. We were all so shocked to learn of your existence. A delightful little family secret." Camilla added, "Indeed, I must confess we're all rather curious. What exactly is your background? My uncle's file on you was rather thin. Something in construction, was it?" She said the word construction as if it were something one might find on the bottom of a shoe. Olivia felt a flush of her old insecurity, but she met their condescending gazes head-on. She had prepared for this with Mr. Davies. "My background is in architecture and design," Olivia said, her voice clear and calm. I specialize in structural integrity and spatial efficiency. I find it's not so different from analyzing a company. You look for a solid foundation check for stress points and ensure the entire structure is designed for sustainable growth. The answer was unexpected, and a few of the other board members exchanged impressed glances. Jeffrey and Camilla merely looked annoyed. Throughout the meeting, they peppered her with pointed questions using jargon and acronyms designed to trip her up. But Olivia, thanks to her grueling weeks of study, was able to follow along, asking intelligent if basic questions. She didn't pretend to be an expert. She positioned herself as a dedicated student, which to her surprise earned her a measure of grudging respect from the non-family members of the board. After the meeting, Mr. Davies gave her a rare approving nod. "You held your own. They expected a frightened little girl. You did not give them one." But Olivia knew this was just the beginning. To truly prove herself, she needed to do more than just study. She needed to act. An opportunity soon presented itself, one that unexpectedly connected her new life with her old. Mr. Henderson, her old boss, called her in a panic. His small firm, Henderson & Associates, was the target of a hostile takeover. A mid-sized private equity firm, Montgomery Capital, was buying up their debt and trying to force a sale. The plan was to absorb their client list and then dissolve the company, leaving 24 employees jobless. The name hit Olivia like a physical blow. Montgomery Capital. It was Preston's firm, the firm she had helped him dream up. He was a piranha swallowing up smaller fish to fuel his own growth. Her old colleagues, the people she had worked with for years, were about to be casualties of his ambition. The old Olivia would have felt helpless. The new Olivia saw an opportunity. She spent 2 days with her finance tutors analyzing Henderson's company from every angle. It was small, but had a solid reputation. And more importantly, a new division focused on eco-friendly urban planning, an area Olivia was passionate about and knew was undervalued. Preston was only seeing the firm's current modest profits. He was blind to its future potential. She went to Mr. Davies. "I want to make my first move," she said. She laid out her proposal. She wouldn't use Beaumont Enterprises' name directly. Instead, she would use a small pre-existing Beaumont subsidiary, a venture capital fund specializing in green tech, to act. The plan was twofold. First, the fund would buy out all of Henderson & Associates' debt from the various creditors before Preston could consolidate it. Second, it would make a significant equity investment in the firm, giving it the capital to expand its sustainable design division and fight off any further takeover attempts. It was a strategic investment that aligned perfectly with the Beaumont portfolio, but it was also deeply personal. Mr. Davies listened intently, a poker face firmly in place. When she finished, he looked at her for a long moment. "This is clever and aggressive. You would be blocking your ex-husband's business deal." "It's not about him," Olivia said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "This is a good investment. The firm has potential that he's too short-sighted to see, and it protects the jobs of good people. It's a sound business decision that also happens to be the right thing to do." A corner of Mr. Davies' mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile. "Your grandfather would have approved of the strategy. He would have been less concerned with the morality." He made a call. The next day, the plan was set in motion. The transaction was swift and silent. One by one, the debt holders sold to Olivia's subsidiary. Mr. Henderson was informed that a new benevolent investor had saved his company and was funding its future. He had no idea it was Olivia. Meanwhile, in another city, Preston Montgomery was likely fuming, his easy conquest having inexplicably vanished from his grasp. He wouldn't know who had outmaneuvered him, only that a more powerful unseen player had entered the game. Sitting in her penthouse looking over the city, Olivia felt a surge of power that had nothing to do with the money. It was the feeling of competence, the feeling of taking a broken situation and fixing it. She hadn't just learned the language of this new world, she was starting to speak it. And she was beginning to suspect that she was very, very good at it. The cheerleader had just bought the team. 3 months passed. Olivia immersed herself in her new role traveling the globe to visit Beaumont's various holdings. She walked the floors of pharmaceutical labs in Germany, toured sustainable real estate developments in Singapore, and sat in on strategy sessions in New York. She was a sponge absorbing everything. Her confidence grew with her knowledge. She began to speak up more in board meetings, offering insights from her unique architectural perspective that the finance-brained executives had never considered. Camilla and Jeffrey continued their campaign of subtle condescension, but it was beginning to lose its sting. The other board members were starting to see her not as an interloper, but as an asset. The inevitable collision with her past happened in a glass-walled boardroom on the 50th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper. Beaumont Enterprises was in the final stages of acquiring a groundbreaking robotics startup called Synapse Dynamics. It was a major strategic move into AI, and Olivia had been a vocal champion of the deal. On the day the final papers were to be signed, however, a complication arose. A smaller aggressive private equity firm had launched a last-minute long-shot competing bid, forcing a face-to-face meeting with Synapse's board. Olivia, along with Robert Chen, the CEO, and two of Beaumont's top lawyers, walked into the meeting room. The Synapse team was already seated, and on the other side of the table, representing the competing bidders, were two figures who made the blood freeze in her veins: Preston Montgomery and Brenda Finch. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down. Olivia could hear the frantic beat of her own heart. Preston was in the middle of a confident laugh with one of the Synapse board members. He looked up as the Beaumont team entered, his smile ready, his hand outstretched. His eyes met Robert Chen's, then moved to the woman standing beside him. His smile didn't just falter, it evaporated. The color drained from his face. His hand, which had been extended for a handshake, hung awkwardly in the air. He looked at Olivia as if he were seeing a ghost in a $4,000 power suit. Brenda's reaction was even more pronounced. Her perfectly made-up face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Her jaw literally dropped. The pen in her hand clattered onto the polished mahogany table. Olivia, however, felt a strange, icy calm settle over her. All those nights studying all those challenges from her cousins, all the pressure, it had forged something new inside her. She held Preston's gaze for a heartbeat, offering no recognition, no flicker of their shared past. Then she coolly looked away, turning her attention to the head of the Synapse board. "Good morning, Mr. Webb," she said, her voice even and professional. "I am Olivia Adler from the Beaumont board. Thank you for accommodating this meeting." The name Adler didn't register with Preston. He had only ever known her as Olivia Montgomery. But Beaumont, the name hung in the air like a thunderclap. The meeting began and the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Preston was completely off his game. He stumbled over his opening remarks, his usual slick presentation reduced to a series of nervous platitudes. He kept glancing at Olivia, his mind clearly racing, trying to solve an impossible equation. How was the timid little drafter he'd discarded sitting at the table with one of the most powerful private corporations in the world? Brenda, after her initial shock, tried to recover. She jumped in, attempting to steer their presentation back on track, but her voice was a little too sharp, her smile a little too brittle. She looked at Olivia with a venomous jealousy that was almost palpable. When it was Beaumont's turn, Robert Chen laid out their offer, a comprehensive long-term strategic partnership that promised not just capital, but access to Beaumont's global research and distribution networks. Then he turned to Olivia. "Ms. Adler has been the driving force behind our interest in Synapse. Perhaps she could share her vision for your technology." This was it, the moment she had been unknowingly preparing for. She stood feeling the eyes of everyone in the room on her, especially Preston's. "Mr. Webb," she began, her voice resonating with a quiet confidence she never knew she possessed. "Montgomery Capital sees Synapse as an asset to be acquired, leveraged, and likely sold for a profit in 5 years. They are financiers. They see a balance sheet." She saw Preston flinch at the directness of her attack. "We at Beaumont see something different. We see a future. My background is in design and structure. I see the bones of things. And Synapse's AI isn't just a product. It's a foundational technology. We don't want to buy you. We want to build with you. We envision your robotics integrated into our automated pharmaceutical labs, your predictive AI optimizing our sustainable urban developments. We offer not an exit strategy, but a legacy. She spoke for 10 minutes, her arguments clear, insightful, and passionate. She laid out a detailed decade-long vision that was so far beyond Preston's simple financial bid that it made his offer look amateurish and predatory. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Mr. Webb and his board were visibly impressed. Preston, desperate to regain control, jumped in. "That's a very romantic vision, Ms. Adler," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, trying to re-establish their old dynamic. "But in the real world, business is about numbers. Our offer is solid, liquid, and immediate." He tried to use her old last name, a slip of the tongue that was both a mistake and a power play. "Ms. Monk-Adler, perhaps you're not familiar with the pressures of this market." Olivia didn't even look at him. She addressed her comments to Mr. Webb. "Some people can only see the price of things, not their value. We believe Synapse's value is immeasurable, and we are prepared to invest in it for the long term. Our offer reflects that." The meeting concluded shortly after. As they were packing their briefcases, Preston cornered her by the door while Brenda watched from a distance, her arms crossed. "Olivia," he hissed, his voice low and urgent. "What is this? What the hell is going on?" She finally turned to face him, her expression as placid as a frozen lake. "I'm not sure I understand the question, Mr. Montgomery." "Don't play dumb with me, Beaumont." "How my family has been in business for quite some time," she said, the statement both true and intentionally evasive. His face cycled through confusion, then dawning greedy realization. "Your family, you come from money. You never told me." The sheer audacity of it, the immediate assumption that she had hidden wealth from him, was almost comical. "The things you don't know about me could fill a library." "Preston," she said softly. She then looked past him at Brenda, who was glaring daggers at her. Olivia offered her a tiny dismissive smile. "It was a pleasure competing with you," she said, the words a master class in professional dismissal. "I'm sure we'll see each other around." She walked out of the boardroom, leaving Preston and Brenda standing amidst the wreckage of their failed bid, staring after a woman they thought they knew, a woman who had just dismantled them without even raising her voice. The cheerleader hadn't just bought the team. She had just beaten the star quarterback at his own game on his own field. And she knew with chilling certainty that this was only the beginning. The Synapse Dynamics deal closed in Beaumont's favor a week later. The victory was sweet, not because she had beaten Preston, but because she had won on her own merits. The win solidified her standing with the board, and even Jeffrey and Camilla's snide remarks became less frequent. They now watched her with a wary resentment rather than open disdain. But Olivia's analytical mind couldn't let go of a detail from the failed bid. Preston's offer for Synapse had been recklessly high, almost desperately so. It was an all-cash offer that for a firm of his size would have represented a massive financial stretch. It wasn't ambitious, it was foolish. Why was he gambling so aggressively? Driven by a mix of professional curiosity and a lingering sense of self-preservation, she decided to dig deeper. She now had the vast resources of Beaumont Enterprises at her disposal. She made a quiet request to Beaumont's internal corporate intelligence division, a team of forensic accountants and analysts who could uncover the financial secrets of entire nations. "I want a full deep-dive workup on Montgomery Capital," she told the division head. "Everything. Debt structure, investment vehicles, cash flow, key partners. I want to see their entire house of cards." While the investigation hummed along in the background, Olivia had to deal with a more immediate threat. Camilla and Jeffrey, seeing their chances of ousting her dwindle, decided to play their final, dirtiest card. A story suddenly appeared in a notorious European tabloid syndicated online across the world. The headline was "Salacious Billionaire's Secret Granddaughter A Chambermaid's Child, the battle for the Beaumont fortune turns ugly. The article, filled with anonymous family sources, painted Olivia as a grasping opportunist. It fabricated a story that her father was not a poor artist, but a hotel porter with whom her mother had a scandalous affair. It claimed Olivia had known about her connection to the Beaumonts for years and had orchestrated a scheme to swindle the true heirs. It was a vile classist attack designed to paint her as illegitimate, unworthy, and a fraud. The blow was personal and public. Her phone lit up with calls from Mr. Davies and the Beaumont PR team. The board was in an uproar. Camilla and Jeffrey feigned outrage. "This is a disgusting attack on our family's integrity," Jeffrey boomed in an emergency conference call. "We must find the source of these lies." Olivia knew with absolute certainty that the source was on that call. But she had no proof. For the first time, she felt the immense pressure of her position. The world was watching. Her family was trying to destroy her. She didn't crumble. She got to work. She called Jessica Chen not as a friend, but as a professional. "Jess, I need a journalist, the best. I need to trace the source of a story, and I need to do it quietly." Jessica, fiercely loyal, mobilized her network. Within 48 hours, she had a name, a freelance gossip columnist known for taking cash for stories. A little more digging, facilitated by a Beaumont security consultant, uncovered a series of encrypted messages and an offshore wire transfer. The money had been funneled through a shell corporation, but the trail ultimately led back to a holding company owned by Jeffrey Beaumont. It was the smoking gun. Armed with this evidence, Olivia didn't go to the press. She went to the board. In a closed-door emergency session, she presented her findings calmly and methodically: the digital trail, the financial records, the irrefutable link to her cousins. The silence in the room was absolute. Camilla's face was ashen. Jeffrey was sweating profusely, his florid face turning a shade of purple. They had been caught, their petty, vicious scheme laid bare. This was not a business disagreement. Olivia said, her voice low but carrying the weight of command. "This was an attempt to destroy my reputation and destabilize this company for personal gain. This is a betrayal not just of me but of my grandfather's legacy and the duty we all have to this board." The vote was unanimous. Jeffrey and Camilla Beaumont were stripped of their board seats and their executive positions effective immediately. They were escorted from the building by security, their decades of scheming ending not with a bang, but with a quiet, humiliating walk of shame. Just as the dust was settling on her internal victory, the head of corporate intelligence delivered his report on Montgomery Capital. It was far worse than Olivia could have imagined. Preston's firm was not just over-leveraged, it was a fraud. He had built his success on a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. He used massive influxes of cash from new investors to pay off earlier ones, all while reporting inflated imaginary profits. The entire enterprise was hollow. He funneled millions into offshore accounts to fund his and Brenda's lavish lifestyle. The penthouse, the sports cars, the designer clothes, the very ring on her finger were all paid for with stolen money. The report concluded that Montgomery Capital was on the verge of collapse. The desperate all-cash offer for Synapse Dynamics had been a last-ditch effort to acquire a legitimate high-value asset that could be used as collateral to secure more funding and keep the scheme alive for another cycle. If he had won that deal, he would have sucked Synapse dry and destroyed it. Olivia hadn't just outmaneuvered him, she had inadvertently saved an innocent company from his parasitic grasp. Staring at the report, Olivia felt a cold clarity. This was bigger than their personal history. Preston wasn't just an arrogant ex-husband. He was a criminal who had defrauded dozens of investors, many of whom were pension funds and retirement accounts. He was ruining innocent people's lives. She thought about the humiliation he had put her through, the condescending smirks, the casual cruelty. She could, with a single phone call, leak the report to the financial press and watch his empire burn. It would be the ultimate revenge. But as she looked out at the city from her grandfather's office, she realized revenge was too small a motive. This was about justice. It was about responsibility. Her grandfather hadn't just left her his money. He had left her his power, and power was a burden as much as it was a privilege. She picked up the phone, but she didn't call a journalist. She called Mr. Davies. "Alistair," she said, her voice firm with resolve. "I need you to arrange a meeting for me with the Securities and Exchange Commission." She wasn't just going to watch his house of cards fall. She was going to be the one to push it over. The stage for the final act was fittingly another charity gala. This time, it was the prestigious Children's Hospital Foundation Ball, an event where the city's old money and new tech titans mingled. Beaumont Enterprises was the lead sponsor, and as the newly consolidated power on the board, Olivia was expected to give the opening address. She stood backstage elegant in a deep emerald gown, a stark contrast to the simple navy dress she had worn to the gala that had started it all. She was no longer the invisible woman shrinking in the corner. She was the center of gravity in the room. Out in the ballroom, Preston and Brenda were making their rounds. To the outside world, they were still the golden couple. News of their failed Synapse bid had been a minor setback, but Preston, a master of spin, had brushed it off as a strategic retreat. They had no idea that federal investigators, armed with the meticulously detailed dossier Olivia had provided, had spent the last 2 weeks building an ironclad case against Montgomery Capital. They had no idea that their world was about to end. Olivia watched them on a monitor. Preston was holding court, a glass of champagne in his hand, laughing his confident laugh. Brenda stood beside him, preening under the admiring gazes, her diamond ring flashing under the chandeliers. They were performing their success, oblivious to the fact that the curtain was about to come down. It was time. Olivia walked onto the stage to a round of warm applause. She approached the podium, her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. She saw Preston look up at her, a flicker of something, annoyance, resentment in his eyes. She began her speech not with platitudes about charity, but with a story about her grandfather. She spoke of his belief that true wealth wasn't about accumulation, but about building things that last: companies, communities, and most importantly, trust. Trust, she said. Her eyes finding Preston's in the crowd is the bedrock of everything we do, in business and in life. It is a fragile thing, easily broken. And when it is broken, not for reasons of failure or misfortune, but through deliberate deception, the damage can be catastrophic. A subtle shift occurred in the room. This was not the standard fundraising speech. As she spoke, 2 well-dressed but stern-looking men entered the ballroom from a side entrance, followed by 2 more. They moved quietly, professionally, their eyes scanning the room. They were not guests. Olivia continued, her voice steady. There are those who build their empires on foundations of integrity. And there are those who build houses of cards, dazzling illusions designed to fool the world, propped up by deceit. But a house of cards, no matter how grand, can never withstand the slightest breeze of truth. Preston's smile was gone. He was looking at the men now, a dawning horror on his face. Brenda, sensing the change in his demeanor, looked from him to the agents, her expression turning from smugness to confusion. The agents were moving towards their table. "Tonight we are here to support an institution built on trust and care," Olivia said, her voice rising with finality. "Let us be reminded that our community is only as strong as its most honest members, and let us have the courage to hold accountable those who would tear it down for their own selfish gain." She finished her speech, and the room, sensing the undercurrent of immense drama, responded with thunderous applause. But Olivia's attention, and everyone else's, was now on Preston's table. One of the agents leaned down and spoke quietly to Preston. "Mr. Preston Montgomery, I'm Agent Miller with the SEC Enforcement Division. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. Please come with us." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Phones were instantly raised, recording the scene. Brenda let out a small, strangled cry, stumbling back from the table as if Preston were suddenly contagious. Preston's face was a mask of disbelief and fury. "This is ridiculous. It's a mistake," he blustered, but there was no conviction in his voice. "There's no mistake, sir," the agent said, his voice flat. As they handcuffed him, Preston's wild, panicked eyes found Olivia on the stage. She was standing perfectly still, watching the scene unfold, not with glee or triumph, but with a calm, somber finality. In that moment, he understood. The anonymous competitor who had snatched Henderson's firm. The mysterious power player at the Synapse meeting. The breeze of truth that had just blown over his house of cards. It was all her. He was led out of the ballroom past the shocked faces of the city's elite, a babbling, pathetic shell of the titan he pretended to be. Brenda stood alone, a pariah in her blood-red dress, the diamond on her finger suddenly looking like a piece of cheap glass. Later that evening, as news of the arrest exploded online, a journalist caught Olivia as she was leaving. "Ms. Adler, your speech was incredibly timely. Do you have any comment on the arrest of Preston Montgomery? A man sources say you have a personal history with Olivia." Looked into the camera, her expression composed and powerful. "Mr. Montgomery's downfall was a result of his own choices. My grandfather's company, Beaumont Enterprises, was made aware of certain financial irregularities, and as is our corporate and ethical duty, we passed that information on to the proper authorities. Our only interest is in maintaining a fair and transparent market for all investors. I have no further comment on my personal history." It was a perfect, devastatingly professional statement. It positioned her not as a vengeful ex-wife, but as a principled corporate leader. A protector of the legacy she now fully controlled. She walked away from the cameras, leaving the frenzy behind. She didn't feel the thrill of revenge she might have once craved. Instead, she felt a quiet sense of peace. The ghosts of her past had been laid to rest not by bitterness, but by her own competence, strength, and integrity. She had not only stepped out of Preston's shadow, she had become a force of nature that cast a shadow of her own, one built not on lies, but on the solid foundation of the Beaumont name, a name she had truly made her own. Olivia Adler's journey from a humiliated ex-wife to a billionaire powerhouse is more than just a revenge story. It's a powerful testament to the strength that lies dormant within us all. It shows that our past does not have to define our future, and that true power isn't found in wealth, but in self-worth, integrity, and the courage to rewrite our own narrative. She didn't just inherit a fortune. She earned her legacy. What did you think of Olivia's incredible transformation? Was her final move against Preston justice or revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you and discussing every twist and turn of the story. If you were captivated by Olivia's rise from the ashes, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who loves a story of ultimate triumph. And of course, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our next gripping tale. Thank you for listening.